I stood in the doorway of our lakeside cabin watching my husband Nicholas and his girlfriend Serena freeze mid-laughter. "Surprise," I said with a calm I didn't feel, dropping my overnight bag on the floor. "I thought I'd join you at my vacation. Home." Their smug expressions vanished when my lawyer stepped in behind me, holding the property deed with my name, and only my name, in bold across the top. The golden afternoon light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lake house, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scene before me seemed like something from a bad movie. My husband of 12 years lounging on our custom sectional sofa, his arm casually draped around a woman who was definitely not me. The bottle of our wedding champagne, the vintage we'd been saving for our 15th anniversary, stood empty on the coffee table between them. I'd driven 5 hours from the city after receiving a text from our neighbor, Mrs. Winters. "Thought you should know your husband's here with a young woman. They've been here 3 days now." The message had come with a photo that made my stomach drop. Nicholas helping a tall blonde carry luggage into our vacation home, the one my grandmother had left specifically to me in her will. For a moment, time seemed suspended as we stared at each other. Nicholas's face shifted from shock to guilt to something resembling indignation in the span of seconds. Serena, I knew her name from the credit card statements I'd found last month, pulled the throw blanket across her bare legs, her perfect features arranging themselves into an expression of practiced innocence. "Sylvie," Nicholas finally said, standing up and adjusting his wrinkled shirt. "This isn't... I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "That you've moved your girlfriend into my grandmother's house? The one place that's been in my family for generations?" Serena stood now, too, brushing her long blonde hair behind her ear. She was younger than me. Of course she was, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real consequences. "Nick said you two were separated," she offered, as if that explained everything. "Did he?" I looked at my husband, the man who still shared my bed in our city apartment 3 nights ago. "How interesting." Nicholas stepped forward, his hands raised in that placating gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage, whenever he'd been caught in a lie, whenever he needed to smooth things over. "Look, we need to talk privately. Serena, can you give us a minute?" "Actually," I said, "Serena should stay. What I have to say concerns both of you." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, sending a quick text before returning my attention to them. Nicholas's expression had hardened now, the initial shock giving way to the arrogance I'd watched grow over our years together as his career flourished while mine took a back seat. "Sylvie, don't make this difficult," he said, lowering his voice to that authoritative tone he used in boardrooms. "We can discuss this like adults." "Oh, I agree completely," I replied, glancing at my watch. "In fact, I've brought someone to help us do exactly that." On cue, the front door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know that Edgar, my family's attorney since I was a child, had arrived. I'd called him the moment I received Mrs. Winters' text, and he'd driven up separately, bringing with him everything we needed. "Hello, Nicholas," Edgar said, his deep voice filling the room as he stepped beside me. "Ms. Sylvie asked me to join your discussion." Nicholas's face paled slightly. He recognized Edgar from the reading of my grandmother's will 3 years ago. "This is unnecessary," he said, but the slight quaver in his voice betrayed his unease. "Actually, it's entirely necessary," I countered, "especially since you seem to be under some misapprehension about this property." Edgar opened his leather portfolio, removing a document I knew by heart, the deed to the lake house, transferred solely to my name as part of my grandmother's estate. Nicholas had been furious when he discovered the house hadn't been left to both of us, had argued that, as my husband, he was entitled to half of anything I owned. I'd nearly given in, had considered adding his name just to keep the peace. How fortunate that I'd never gotten around to it. Perhaps you'd like to explain to your friend the actual ownership situation of this property, Edgar suggested, placing the deed on the coffee table. Serena leaned forward, her practiced confidence wavering as she scanned the document. Nick, you said this was your vacation home, she said, confusion evident in her voice. You said we could stay here whenever we wanted. It's complicated, Nicholas muttered, not meeting her eyes. Actually, it's quite simple, I interjected. This house belongs to me, only me. It was left to me by my grandmother and was never part of our marital assets. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations. Nicholas glared at me, his jaw tight. I could almost hear the calculations running through his mind, the desperate search for leverage. We're still married, he finally said. I have rights. Edgar cleared his throat. About that, he said, pulling another set of documents from his portfolio. Ms. Sylvie has instructed me to initiate divorce proceedings. Given the, circumstances, I believe the court will look favorably on her petition. Nicholas's face flushed dark red. You can't just walk in here and… Actually, I can, I interrupted. This is my property. You and Serena are here without my permission. Legally speaking, you're trespassing. Serena stood abruptly, gathering her things. You told me she knew about us, she hissed at Nicholas. You said she was fine with it. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The betrayal written across her face mirrored what I'd felt discovering Nicholas's deception. The credit card statements, the late-night calls, the sudden business trips that never seemed to generate the usual email traffic. I suggest you both pack your things, Edgar said calmly. Ms. Sylvie has been generous enough not to involve the authorities, but she would like you to vacate the premises immediately. Nicholas looked at me, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. Sylvie, we need to talk about this. 12 years of marriage. You can't throw that away without giving me a chance to explain. I met his gaze steadily, feeling a strange calm settle over me. For years I'd bent to his will, compromised my needs for his career, his ambitions, his desires. Standing in my grandmother's house, the place where I'd spent childhood summers building sandcastles and learning to sail, I finally saw Nicholas clearly. There's nothing to explain, I said quietly. And there's nothing here that belongs to you. My name is Sylvie Harrington, and until 3 months ago, I believed I was living the dream. Nicholas and I met during our final year of college. He was studying finance, and I was pursuing a degree in architectural design. We were young, ambitious, and madly in love, or so I thought. After graduation, we moved to the city together, Nicholas taking a position at a prestigious investment firm while I joined a small but innovative design studio. Those early years were magical. We worked hard during the week and spent weekends exploring hidden corners of the city, planning our future together. When Nicholas proposed on our 3rd anniversary with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We married in a small ceremony at my grandmother Blair's lake house, the same one Nicholas and Serena had now invaded. The property had been in my family for generations, a beautiful craftsman-style home on the shores of Lake Windermere. My grandparents had purchased it in the 1960s, and it had become our family's gathering place for holidays, celebrations, and quiet retreats from city life. My grandmother was a remarkable woman. Widowed young, she'd built a successful interior design business in an era when female entrepreneurs were rare. She had an eye for beauty and value, collecting art and antiques that transformed the lake house into a showplace that still felt like home. Some of my earliest memories were of sitting beside her on the dock, watching the sunset while she told me stories about the artifacts that filled the house, each one carrying its own history, its own significance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Remember, Sylvie," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm. "Beautiful things aren't just possessions. They're connections to our past, reminders of who we are." When she passed away 3 years ago, I was devastated. Nicholas had been surprisingly distant during the funeral, checking his phone throughout the service and rushing back to the city the next day for what he claimed was an urgent client meeting. At the time, I'd attributed his behavior to discomfort. With grief, Nicholas had always struggled with emotional situations. Now, I wondered if there had been another reason for his hurry to return to the city. The reading of my grandmother's will had been a source of tension between us. She'd left me several pieces of jewelry, her art collection, and most significantly, the lake house. Nicholas had been genuinely shocked when the attorney, Edgar, the same man who now stood beside me facing down my husband and his girlfriend, announced that the property had been left solely to me, with specific language excluding it from marital assets. "Your grandmother never liked me," Nicholas had fumed during the drive back to the city. "This is her final way of showing it." "That's not true," I'd protested. "She just wanted to preserve the family connection to the house. It's been in my family for generations." "We're family, Sylvie. Or have you forgotten that?" His knuckles had whitened on the steering wheel. "What's yours is mine. That's what marriage means." To keep the peace, I'd agreed to consider adding his name to the deed. It was a promise I'd never fulfilled, not out of malice, but because life had gotten busy. Nicholas's career had taken off, requiring frequent travel and long hours. My own work had become more demanding as I was promoted to lead designer at my firm. The paperwork for the lake house had gotten lost in the shuffle of our daily lives, pushed to the bottom of an ever-growing to-do list. Now standing in the lakeside living room with Edgar beside me and the deed in hand, I was profoundly grateful for that oversight. Our marriage had begun to change about 2 years ago. Nicholas became increasingly absorbed in his work, canceling plans at the last minute, missing anniversaries and birthdays. When he was home, he was distant, spending hours on his phone or laptop. I told myself it was just the pressure of his job. He'd recently been promoted to senior vice president, a position that came with greater responsibilities and expectations. I tried everything to reconnect with him. Planned surprise weekends away, cooked elaborate dinners, even suggested marriage counseling. Nicholas dismissed each attempt, insisting there was nothing wrong, that I was being oversensitive and needy. Gradually, I began to believe him. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe his emotional distance was normal in a long-term relationship. The lake house became my sanctuary during this time. While Nicholas claimed he was too busy to join me, I'd drive up alone for weekends, finding peace in the familiar surroundings. I'd sit on the dock where my grandmother and I had spent so many hours, seeking her wisdom across the years that separated us. Somehow, surrounded by her things, I felt stronger, more certain of myself. It was during one of these solo trips 2 months ago that I first noticed something odd. Several items had been moved, not dramatically, but enough that someone who knew the house would notice. A photograph that had always sat on the mantel was now on a side table. My grandmother's favorite cashmere throw, normally folded over her reading chair, was draped across the sofa. The guest room bed had been recently made, though I always closed up that room when I left. I mentioned it to Mrs. Winters, our closest neighbor and self-appointed guardian of the cove. "Oh, your husband was here last weekend," she said casually, as we chatted over the fence. "I assumed you knew." My stomach had tightened at her words. Nicholas had told me he was in Chicago for a conference that weekend. Was he alone? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mrs. Winters had hesitated, discomfort evident in her expression. "I didn't want to get involved in your business, dear," she said finally. But no, he wasn't alone. That conversation had been the first crack in the foundation of denial I'd built around our marriage. When I returned to the city, I began to pay closer attention. To Nicholas's schedule, his excuses, the details that didn't quite add up. I checked our joint credit card statements, finding charges for restaurants I'd never visited, gifts I'd never received. There were frequent weekend charges at the small grocery store near the lake house during times Nicholas had claimed to be working or traveling for business. The evidence mounted piece by painful piece until I could no longer ignore the truth. Despite the mounting evidence, I hadn't confronted Nicholas immediately. A part of me, perhaps the part that still believed in the life we'd built together, wanted to be wrong. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't involve betrayal. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. So I watched, and I waited, and I pretended that everything was normal. On the surface, our life continued as it had for the past 12 years. We shared meals when Nicholas was home, attended his company functions where I played the role of the supportive wife, and slept in the same bed though the distance between us grew wider by the day. Our city apartment reflected Nicholas's taste, more than mine, sleek, modern, and impersonal, like something from an upscale catalog rather than a real home. When we'd first moved in, I'd tried to add personal touches, photographs, art pieces I loved, the vintage lamps my grandmother had given me. But over time, Nicholas had replaced most of these with what he called more sophisticated pieces that better reflected his growing status. "We need to present a certain image," he'd explained when I objected to him removing the gallery wall of family photos I'd carefully arranged. "People from the firm come here. First impressions matter." Our daily routines rarely intersected anymore. Nicholas rose before dawn to hit the gym, returning just as I was leaving for work. Most evenings he came home after I'd already eaten dinner alone and settled in with a book or design project. On weekends, he was either working or attending client events that somehow never included spouses. I'd thrown myself into my career, finding satisfaction in the tangible results of my work. As a lead designer at the firm, I specialized in repurposing historic buildings, preserving their character while adapting them for modern use. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days restoring beautiful but damaged structures, trying to honor their past while ensuring their future, all while my marriage crumbled around me. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Tiffany, my assistant, and closest work friend, tried to draw me out during our coffee breaks. "You don't mention Nicholas much anymore," she observed one afternoon as we reviewed samples for a downtown renovation project. "Everything okay?" I'd brushed off her concern with a practiced smile. "He's just busy with work. You know how it is during the fiscal year end." "It's been fiscal year end for about 6 months now," she'd replied dryly. "Just remember I'm here if you need to talk." I appreciated her concern, but wasn't ready to voice my suspicions. Saying them aloud would make them real, would force me to make decisions I wasn't prepared to face. Instead, I channeled my energy into making the lake house truly mine. During my weekend trips, I began subtle renovations, repainting the kitchen in colors my grandmother would have loved, refinishing the dock where we'd spent so many summer evenings, planting a garden of native wildflowers along the path to the shore. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a quiet declaration that this place, unlike my marriage, was still within my control. The financial arrangements of our marriage had evolved over time in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until I began examining our lives more critically. When we first married, we'd maintained separate accounts, along with a joint account for household expenses. As Nicholas's career accelerated and my income became secondary to his, he'd taken over managing our finances. "It makes sense for me to handle this," he'd insisted. "It's what I do professionally, after all." Gradually, more of my paycheck had been diverted into investment accounts he managed, leaving me with a personal allowance that seemed generous but kept me dependent on his financial decisions. Our property, the apartment, our cars, our investments, were all in both our names, with one significant exception: the lake house. Now I understood why Nicholas had been so insistent that I add his name to the deed. It wasn't sentiment or a desire to share in my family's legacy. It was about ownership, about control. 3 weeks ago, Everything had changed. I'd come home early from work, a migraine forcing me to abandon a client meeting. The apartment had been quiet, and I'd headed straight for our bedroom, seeking the darkness and silence that would ease my pounding head. That's when I'd found them. Not Nicholas and another woman as I might have expected, but documents spread across our bed. Property valuations for the lake house, development proposals, architectural renderings showing my grandmother's beloved home demolished, replaced by a complex of modern condominiums stretching along the shoreline. My migraine forgotten, I'd photographed everything before, carefully returning the papers to Nicholas's briefcase. That night, when he'd returned home, I'd pretended nothing had changed, though everything had. The next morning, I'd called Edgar. I need to understand exactly where I stand. Legally, I'd told him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. And I need to know what Nicholas might be planning. Edgar had been my grandmother's attorney for decades and had watched me grow up. His concern was evident, but his response was professional. Come to my office, he'd said. Bring any financial documents you can access without raising suspicion. We'll figure this out. What followed was an education in the life I thought I'd been living. Edgar helped me trace the movement of our assets, uncovering patterns that revealed Nicholas's true priorities. He'd been systematically positioning himself for a separation that would leave him with the lion's share of our accumulated wealth, while simultaneously exploring development opportunities for the lake property, the one asset he couldn't directly control. And there's something else you should know, Edgar had said gently, sliding a folder across his desk. I had my assistant do some basic research on Nicholas's recent activities. Inside were photographs, Nicholas and a blonde woman at restaurants, at a theater, entering hotels. The same woman appeared in every image, young, beautiful, confident, Serena. According to my sources, she works at his firm, Edgar explained. Junior investment analyst, started about 18 months ago. The timeline aligned perfectly with the changes in Nicholas's behavior, with the growing distance between us. 18 months of lies. 18 months of betrayal while I made excuses for him, doubted myself, tried harder to be what he needed. What do you want to do, Sylvie? Edgar had asked, his kind eyes holding mine. For the first time in years, I'd answered without considering what Nicholas would want. What would keep the peace? What would preserve the facade of our perfect life? I want to protect what's mine, I'd said, and I want the truth. The first time I saw Serena in person was entirely by accident. I was having lunch with a client in the financial district, discussing potential designs for their new office space. We'd chosen an upscale restaurant known for its discretion and privacy, the kind of place where business deals were negotiated over expertly prepared meals. I was midway through explaining my concept for incorporating the company's heritage into a modern workspace when I saw them, Nicholas and Serena, being seated at a corner table with the kind of attentive service reserved for regular patrons. Nicholas's hand rested possessively on the small of her back as they followed the maitre d'. His fingers splayed across the silky fabric of her dress in a gesture of casual intimacy that he'd once reserved for me. My words faltered, and my client turned to follow my gaze. Isn't that your husband? She asked, her voice lowered. Nicholas Harrington from Westbrook Capital? I forced a smile, trying to steady my trembling hands beneath the table. Yes, must be a business lunch. With Serena Wright? My client raised an eyebrow. She's making quite a name for herself as their newest rising star. I heard she closed the Peterson deal single-handedly last month. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur. I nodded at appropriate intervals, made notes I couldn't later decipher, and somehow managed to conclude our meeting without betraying the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. As we parted ways in front of the restaurant, I deliberately took the path that would lead me past their table. Nicholas saw me first. The flash of panic in his eyes was quickly replaced by a practiced smile as he stood to greet me. Sylvie, what a surprise. His voice carried just the right note of pleased coincidence. We were just discussing the Eastbrook portfolio. Serena's been instrumental in restructuring their investments. Serena looked up, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features before her professional mask slipped into place. She extended her hand with a confidence that seemed slightly forced. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said, her voice warm and controlled. "Nicholas speaks of you often." I wondered what exactly he had told her about me as I shook her hand. Did she know about our fights over the lake house? Had he shared his frustrations about my refusal to relocate when his firm offered him a position in their London office? Did she believe she was in love with the real Nicholas, or merely the version he presented to the world? "Likewise," I replied, my own smile firmly in place. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just business," Nicholas assured me. Quickly, too quickly. I noticed the details then, the half-empty wine glasses, though it was barely 1 p.m., the lack of papers or portfolios that would indicate a business meeting, the slight smudge of her lipstick, and the corresponding mark on his water glass. "Don't let me keep you," I said, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. "I have a client waiting for design revisions. Nice meeting you, Serena." As I walked away, I heard Nicholas's low murmur. "She doesn't suspect anything," and Serena's soft laugh in response. That night, Nicholas came home later than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing contracts for an upcoming project. When he walked in reeking of expensive scotch and Serena's distinctive perfume, a scent I'd caught at the restaurant and now recognized from traces left in our apartment on days he claimed to work late. "You're still up," he said, loosening his tie as he dropped his keys into the bowl by the door. "Deadline?" "Something like that." I kept my voice neutral, watching as he poured himself a glass of water, his movements precise despite the alcohol. I could smell on his breath. "How was your day?" "Productive," he replied, leaning against the counter. "We're making progress on the Jensen acquisition." Another lie, delivered without hesitation. I wondered how many similar untruths I'd accepted over the years, how long I'd been living with this stranger who wore my husband's face. "I ran into you at Maison Laurent today," I said, observing his reaction carefully. "You and Serena seemed engrossed in your business discussion." A brief tensing of his shoulders was the only indication that my words had registered. His face remained impassive, his voice steady. "She's a valuable team member. Bright, ambitious. Reminds me a bit of you when we first met, actually." The comparison landed like a slap. Was that how he'd justified it to himself? That he'd simply traded in for a newer model of the same woman? "Interesting," I said, closing my laptop. "I didn't realize investment analysis required such intimate seating arrangements." Nicholas's expression hardened, the mask of casual indifference, slipping to reveal irritation beneath. "Don't start, Sylvie. It was a business lunch in a public restaurant. If I were hiding something, would I take her there?" The audacity of his deflection almost made me laugh. Of course he would, Nicholas. Had always hidden things in plain sight, believing his confidence would prevent anyone from questioning him. "You're right," I conceded, standing to leave. "I'm tired and reading too much into things. I think I'll turn in." As I passed him, he caught my arm, his grip firm but not painful. "We should plan a weekend at the lake house soon. It's been too long since we went together." My heart stuttered. Was this a test? Did he suspect that I knew about his visits there with Serena? "That would be nice," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "It would give us a chance to really talk." Something flickered in his eyes, calculation perhaps, or concern, before he released my arm with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll check my calendar tomorrow. See when I can clear a few days." That night, lying beside him in our bed, listening to his even breathing as he slept unburdened by guilt, I made my decision. The time for watching and waiting was over. Whatever game Nicholas was playing with our marriage, with my family's legacy, I needed to understand the rules and then change them. The next morning, I called Bobby, an old college friend who now worked as a private investigator. We'd stayed in touch over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee to reminisce about our university days. I'd been a bridesmaid at his wedding. He'd helped design the built-in bookshelves for our first apartment. "I need your help," I told him, speaking softly from my car, parked 3 blocks from our apartment. "And I need absolute discretion." "You've got it," he replied without hesitation. "What's going on, Sylvie?" I explained the situation as concisely as I could, the discovery of Nicholas's affair, the development plans for the lake house, my suspicions about our finances. Bobby listened without interruption, only asking clarifying questions when I finished. "I can start surveillance today," he said. "But Sylvie, you should know. Once you go down this road, once you have concrete evidence, there's no going back to not knowing." "I'm past that point already," I assured him. "I don't need to know if he's cheating. I know he is. What I need is to understand what he's planning, especially regarding the lake house. I need to be prepared." "Understood. I'll be in touch soon." As I ended the call, a notification appeared on my phone, a calendar reminder for the charity gala. That weekend, an annual event hosted by Nicholas's firm. In previous years, I'd spent weeks preparing for it, selecting the perfect dress, scheduling hair and makeup appointments, preparing to play my role as the successful executive's charming. This year, I hadn't given it a thought, but now, staring at the reminder, I realized it presented an opportunity. If Nicholas would be occupied at the gala, preening for his colleagues and superiors with me dutifully by his side, that would leave Serena unaccounted for. And people tended to be careless when they thought no one was watching. I texted Bobby with this additional information, suggesting he might want to keep an eye on Serena during the event. Then I called my favorite boutique to schedule an appointment for a dress fitting. If I was going to play the unsuspecting wife for one last time, I intended to look spectacular doing it. The charity gala was held at the Westbrook Museum of Modern Art, its soaring glass atrium transformed for the evening with cascading white orchids and subtle lighting that made everyone look slightly more beautiful than they were. I wore a midnight blue gown that hugged my figure before falling in a graceful sweep to the floor. Classic, but with architectural details that reflected my professional aesthetic. Nicholas had barely glanced at me as we entered, his eyes scanning the crowd for faces more important than mine. "Let's make the rounds," he said, his hand at my elbow guiding me toward a cluster of gray-haired men whose combined net worth could probably fund a small nation. "The Princeton Group is considering moving their portfolio to us. I need to make an impression." The evening unfolded as these events always did, a carefully choreographed dance of networking, small talk, and strategic appearances. Nicholas kept me by his side when it served his purpose, introducing me to potential clients who might be impressed by his designer wife, then abandoning me at the bar or buffet when more promising opportunities arose. In years past, I'd filled these abandoned moments by chatting with the other plus ones or admiring the museum's collection. Tonight, I had a different agenda. As Nicholas deep-dived into conversation with the CEO of a tech startup, I slipped away, making my way toward Tiffany, who was attending with her husband. "You look stunning," she said, embracing me warmly. "That shade of blue is perfect with your coloring." We chatted for a few minutes about inconsequential things: a challenging client, the upcoming design conference, her plans to renovate her kitchen. Then, ensuring Nicholas was still occupied, I leaned closer. "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice casual. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." Tiffany's expression turned serious. "Of course. What is it?" "You mentioned last month that your brother works for Lakeside Development Partners. Is he still with them?" She nodded, looking slightly confused. "He's one of their project managers. Why do you ask?" I took a sip of my champagne before answering. "I've heard rumors they're looking at properties around Lake Windermere. That's where my family's vacation home is, and I'm concerned about overdevelopment in the area. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You're worried about property values? Among other things, I replied vaguely. If you wouldn't mind asking him what he knows about their plans, I'd appreciate it. Discreetly, of course. Consider it done, she promised. I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night. I'll text you afterward. Our conversation shifted to safer topics as I noticed Nicholas approaching, his expression indicating he'd registered my absence and wasn't pleased. He joined our circle with practiced charm, complimenting Tiffany's dress and asking after her husband, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. I was just telling Sylvie about the Anderson project, Tiffany said smoothly. The client doubled their budget after seeing her initial designs. Nicholas's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's my wife, always exceeding expectations. As the evening progressed, I noticed something I might have missed before. How Nicholas carefully managed not to be photographed near certain colleagues, particularly the younger female associates. His awareness of sightlines, his strategic positioning during group photos, all suggested a man accustomed to managing appearances. And then I saw her. Not physically present at the gala, but in a photograph on the firm's Rising Stars display near the entrance. Serena Wright, looking confident and professional in a tailored suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. The accompanying text praised her innovative approach to client portfolios and mentioned her recent promotion to associate director, a promotion that would typically have been announced at this very gala, with the recipient present to accept congratulations. Yet Serena was conspicuously absent. My phone vibrated in my clutch. Excusing myself to the ladies' room, I checked the message. A text from Bobby with an attachment. Subject B at location A with unknown male. Photos attached. I locked myself in a stall before opening the attachment. The images showed Serena entering our lake house, accompanied by a man who wasn't Nicholas. Older, distinguished-looking, wearing an expensive suit. I recognized him instantly. Martin Lockwood, the CEO of Lakeside Development Partners. My hands shook slightly as I typed a response. Need more info on male subject and nature of meeting. Bobby's reply came quickly. On it. Stay at event as planned. Will update. When I returned to the gala, Nicholas was deep in conversation with the firm's founder, an intimidating man in his 70s who rarely attended social functions. I hung back, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly an important moment for Nicholas's career ambitions. From my vantage point, I could observe without being noticed, watching as Nicholas nodded earnestly, his body language deferential yet confident. I caught fragments of their conversation as a waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Completely confidential until the papers are signed. Assured me the lakefront acquisition is proceeding as planned. Wright has been invaluable in positioning the assets. My blood ran cold. They were discussing the lake house, my lake house, as if its acquisition was already a foregone conclusion. And Serena was somehow involved in the plan. As I processed this information, my phone vibrated again. Another message from Bobby. Meeting appears to be site evaluation, development plans being discussed, blueprints visible, recording audio when possible. I slipped my phone back into my clutch just as Nicholas looked up, catching my eye across the room. He excused himself from the conversation and made his way toward me, his expression unreadable. There you are, he said, his tone light but his eyes assessing. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me. Just freshening up, I replied, matching his casual tone. Important conversations happening tonight? Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, that I'd noticed the significance of his interaction with the founder. Potentially. James might be stepping back from day-to-day operations soon. There's talk of restructuring the leadership team. Another half-truth. Whatever was being discussed was far more specific than a vague leadership restructuring. That sounds promising for you, I said, maintaining my supportive wife persona while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd learned. Nicholas checked his watch, an antique Patek Philippe that had been a gift from my grandmother on our wedding day. It's getting late. We should think about heading home soon. As we made our goodbyes, collecting our coats and waiting for the valet to bring our car, I felt Nicholas studying me with unusual intensity. "You're quiet tonight?" he observed as we slid into the Mercedes. "Everything all right?" I turned to him, wondering if he could see the difference in me, if he could tell that the woman sitting beside him was no longer the trusting wife he'd manipulated for years. "Just tired," I said, offering a small smile. "It's been a long week." Reached across the console to take my hand, a gesture that would have once thrilled me with its spontaneity. Now I recognized it for what it was, calculated affection designed to reassure and disarm. "I've been thinking about what you said about the lake house," he said, his eyes on the road ahead. "You're right. We should spend more time there. In fact, I've cleared my schedule for next weekend. What do you say we drive up Friday morning? Just the two of us." My heart raced as I processed the implication. Nicholas wanted to take me to the lake house, the same place where Serena was currently meeting with a development executive, the same property they were apparently planning to acquire and demolish. "That sounds perfect," I replied, squeezing his hand gently before releasing it. "I've missed our time there." As we drove through the nighttime city toward our apartment, I gazed out the window at the glittering skyline, my mind working through scenarios and timelines. Whatever Nicholas and Serena were planning, they clearly intended to accelerate their timeline, which meant I needed to accelerate mine as well. When we arrived home, Nicholas headed straight for the shower, a ritual after these events, washing away the scent of cigarette smoke and perfume that clung to his clothes. As the water ran, I quickly checked my phone for updates from Bobby. His latest message contained a single audio file with the text, "Listen immediately, delete after." I waited until Nicholas was asleep before listening to the recording Bobby had sent. Slipping into the guest bathroom, I locked the door, turned on the fan to mask any sound, and plugged in my earbuds. The audio was surprisingly clear. Bobby had somehow managed to place a device close enough to capture Serena's conversation, with Martin Lockwood in detail. Their voices echoed slightly against the lake house's wooden surfaces, creating an eerie sensation as I stood in my city apartment bathroom, eavesdropping on a conversation happening in my grandmother's home. The property assessment came back. "Even better than we anticipated," Lockwood was saying, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to closing deals. 13 acres of prime lakefront. With that kind of elevation and southern exposure, we could fit 20 luxury units and still maintain the exclusivity factor. "And Nicholas has confirmed he can deliver the property?" Serena's voice, professional and composed. "That's where you come in, isn't it?" A chuckle from Lockwood. "He seems convinced his wife will sign over her interest once the divorce papers are filed. Something about her being conflict-averse and willing to settle quickly." My fingers tightened around my phone. Conflict-averse. That was how Nicholas saw me, as someone so desperate to avoid confrontation that I'd surrender my grandmother's legacy without a fight. "The timing is delicate," Serena continued. "Nicholas needs to secure financing for his portion of the development before approaching her with the divorce. The firm's partnership announcement happens next month, which should give him the capital base he needs." "And your role in all this? Beyond the obvious personal connection?" Lockwood's tone carried a hint of amusement. "I've structured the investment vehicle that will fund the initial development phase. The returns will be significant, especially for early participants like yourself. And these returns aren't reflected in the official prospectus, I assume?" "Let's just say there are certain efficiencies in the cost structure that create additional margin. Nothing improper, simply creative accounting." They were discussing fraud. Not just the theft of my property, but a financial scheme designed to siphon money from investors. And Nicholas was at the center of it all. The conversation continued, detailing construction timelines, marketing strategies, and the delicate maneuvering required to keep the project under wraps until all the pieces were in place. They spoke of my home, the place where I'd built childhood memories, where I'd married Nicholas, where my grandmother had spent her final days, as if it were already demolished, replaced by their vision of luxury condominiums. As the recording ended, I sat motionless on the edge of the bathtub, my mind reeling from what I'd heard. The betrayal was far deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just an affair, a midlife crisis, or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, strategic, and had been in motion for months, if not years. Nicholas wasn't planning to divorce me because our marriage had failed. He was planning to divorce me to steal my property and use it for a fraudulent development scheme. I deleted the recording as instructed and sent Bobby a brief message. Received. Need all documentation you can gather on Lakeside Development and their plans. Also need complete timeline of N's meetings with them. Returning to our bedroom, I watched Nicholas sleeping peacefully. His face relaxed in a way it rarely was when awake. How long had he been living this double life? How many other lies had I accepted without question? The next morning, I woke before Nicholas, my mind clear despite the minimal sleep. I'd spent the night cycling through emotions, shock, rage, grief, and finally, a cold, focused determination. By the time sunrise filtered through our bedroom blinds, I had a plan. I slipped out of bed and prepared for the day as if nothing had changed. Coffee brewing, breakfast laid out, the morning newspaper folded beside Nicholas's plate, all the small rituals of our marriage performed with mechanical precision, while my mind worked on a completely different track. Nicholas emerged from the bedroom looking slightly haggard from the previous night's champagne, but pulled together in the way that successful men in our circle always managed to be. Even at their worst, they presented an image of control. "You're up early," he observed, accepting the coffee I handed him. "Plans today?" "Just some errands," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "Thought I'd pick up a few things for the lake house next weekend. Maybe new linens for the guest room. It's been ages since we refreshed anything there." A flicker of something, concern, confusion, crossed his face before he masked it with a smile. "Good idea. Maybe grab some of that local wine we like too. Make it a proper getaway." He was playing along, maintaining the fiction that our upcoming trip was a romantic retreat rather than whatever he had actually planned. I wondered if Serena would be there, hidden nearby, waiting for some signal. Or perhaps this was when Nicholas intended to serve me with divorce papers, choosing a private location where my reaction wouldn't be witnessed. "Absolutely," I agreed, sipping my own coffee. "It'll be nice to have uninterrupted time together. We can talk about the future." Nicholas's phone chimed with a message. He glanced at it, his expression shifting subtly before he tucked the device into his pocket. "I need to head into the office for a few hours. Some issues with the Jensen portfolio that can't wait until Monday." Another lie. It was becoming almost comical how easily they flowed from him, how little effort he put into making them convincing now that he believed I suspected nothing. "Of course," I said, leaning in to accept his perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Don't count on it. These things can drag on." He was already moving toward the door, gathering his keys and wallet. "Don't wait up." The door closed behind him. I allowed my facade to drop, my shoulders sagging with the relief of no longer having to pretend. I gave him 15 minutes to ensure he wouldn't return for something forgotten, then sprang into action. First, I called Edgar, requesting an emergency meeting at his office. Then I contacted Bobby, asking him to continue surveillance on both Nicholas and Serena. Finally, I reached out to Tiffany, confirming our lunch plans for that afternoon. A casual meetup that would provide the perfect cover for what I really intended to do. Before leaving the apartment, I went to Nicholas's home office, a space he'd claimed was off-limits due to client confidentiality concerns. This had never bothered me before. I'd respected his professional boundaries just as he respected mine. Now, I saw it for what it was. Another mechanism of control, another way to hide his deceptions. The door was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key, hidden inside an unused humidor in our living room credenza. Inside his office, I worked quickly, photographing documents, downloading files from his unlocked computer, and searching for any physical evidence of the lakeside development plan. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a false panel, I discovered, by chance, I found what I was looking for, a preliminary contract between Nicholas and Lakeside Development, outlining terms for the sale of the property known as Windermere Lodge once the current ownership situation is resolved. The document was unsigned but contained detailed notes in Nicholas's handwriting about timing, valuation, and potential resistance points. My grandmother's house, my house, reduced to an ownership situation to be resolved. With the evidence secured, I locked the office and left the apartment, my mind shifting to the next phase of my plan. As I stepped into the brightness of the spring morning, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The worst had happened. My husband was betraying me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and yet I was still standing, still thinking clearly, still moving forward. Edgar's office occupied the top floor of a brownstone in the historic district, a space that reflected his decades of practice, traditional without being stuffy, elegant without ostentation. As his assistant showed me in, I noticed he'd already prepared for our meeting, files spread across his desk, his computer displaying property records for the lake house. "Sylvie," he greeted me, standing as I entered. I cleared my schedule as, "Soon as I got your call." I placed my phone on his desk, the screen displaying the photos I'd taken of Nicholas's hidden documents. It's worse than we thought. For the next hour, I laid out everything I'd discovered, the recordings from the lake house, the contract I'd found in Nicholas's office, the conversations I'd overheard at the gala. Edgar listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, or examining the evidence I presented. "This is extensive," he said finally, removing his reading glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "Nicholas has overplayed his hand, legally speaking. What they're planning borders on fraud, particularly the investment structure Serena described. Can they take the lake house? That was my primary concern. Everything else was secondary." Edgar shook his head firmly. "Not without your signature. The property is solely in your name, and your grandmother's will included specific language preventing transfer without your explicit consent. But Nicholas clearly believes he can pressure you into signing once he serves divorce papers. He's planning to take me to the lake house next weekend," I said, the reality of the situation sending a chill through me. "I think that's when he intends to present the divorce and pressure me to sign over the property." Edgar's expression darkened. "That's concerning. Isolated location, emotional manipulation, classic pressure tactics." He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Sylvie, I don't think you should go to the lake house with him. It's not safe." "I agree," I replied, surprising him with my calm. "But I'm not going to cancel either. I'm going to turn his plan against him." I outlined what I had in mind, a counter-move that would require precise timing and Edgar's full support. As I spoke, his expression shifted from concern to cautious approval. "It's risky," he warned. "If Nicholas realizes what you're doing before everything is in place, he won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Nicholas's greatest weakness has always been his arrogance. He believes I'm too conflict-averse to stand up to him, too naive to uncover his schemes. He won't see this coming." Edgar studied me for a long moment before nodding. "I'll make the necessary arrangements. But I want a backup plan in place. If anything seems off, you call me immediately." Agreed. As I left Edgar's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Bobby. "N meeting with S at downtown hotel, continuing surveillance." I texted back a brief acknowledgement before heading to my lunch with Tiffany. My mind was racing with preparations, contingencies, and the enormity of what Nicholas had planned. and what I now intended to do in response. Tiffany was already seated at our usual cafe when I arrived, a folder beside her coffee cup. Her expression brightened when she saw me, then quickly shifted to concern. "You look exhausted," she said as I slid into the chair across from her. "Rough night after the gala?" "Something like that," I replied, ordering a coffee when the waiter approached. "Did you speak with your brother?" Tiffany pushed the folder toward me. "He did better than just talk. He sent these." Inside were printouts of internal lakeside development, documents, project timelines, financial projections, and architectural renderings for Windermere Villas, a luxury condominium development to be built on the site of my family's lake house. "He says they've been working on this project for months," Tiffany continued, her voice low. "The plans are quite advanced. They're just waiting on site acquisition, which is apparently happening soon." I flipped through the pages, my coffee forgotten, as I absorbed the details of what they planned to do to my grandmother's property. The beautiful craftsman home would be demolished, the ancient oak trees cleared, the natural shoreline replaced with concrete retaining walls to maximize the number of units with water access. "Did he mention who their contact was for the acquisition?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tiffany hesitated. "That's the other thing. He said the property is coming through Nicholas's investment vehicle. Sylvie, is something going on that I should know about?" I met her concerned gaze, considering how much to share. Tiffany had been my friend for years, but this was becoming a legal matter, potentially even a criminal one. "Nicholas and I are having some disagreements about the lake house," I said carefully. "He wants to develop it and I don't. It's complicated." "Complicated," Tiffany repeated, clearly not buying my oversimplification. "Sylvie, these plans are dated months ago. Has Nicholas discussed any of this with you?" "No," I admitted. "He hasn't." Tiffany reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "Then it's not a disagreement. It's something else entirely." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "My brother also mentioned that the project lead at Lakeside is personally involved with someone at Westbrook Capital, a woman named Serena Wright. Does that name mean anything to you?" The pieces were falling into place, each new revelation confirming what I already suspected. Nicholas, Serena, and Martin Lockwood had created an intricate web of professional and personal connections, all centered around my property. "It does," I replied, deciding to trust Tiffany with at least part of the truth. "Nicholas is having an affair with her." Tiffany's eyes widened. "Oh, Sylvie, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "I'm handling it." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you are. What can I do to help?" "These documents," I said, tapping the folder. "Can I keep them? And can you ask your brother to keep me informed about any developments with the project?" "Of course." He was actually pretty disturbed when he realized whose property they were planning to develop. Said it felt underhanded, especially with all the secrecy surrounding the acquisition. After lunch, I took the documents straight to Edgar's office, adding them to the growing pile of evidence. He examined the renderings with a deep frown. "They've invested significant resources in this," he noted. "Architecture, engineering, marketing materials, all before securing the property? That's unusual." "Not if they believed the acquisition was guaranteed," I replied. "Nicholas must have assured them I would sign." Edgar looked up from the documents, his expression grave. "Sylvie, this goes beyond a matrimonial dispute or even a dishonest real estate deal. What they're planning, particularly the investment structure, potentially violates securities laws. If Nicholas has been using his position at Westbrook to raise money for this venture under false pretenses, then it's fraud," I finished for him. "I suspected as much from the recording." "This changes our approach," Edgar said, reaching for his phone. "I need to bring in someone who specializes in financial crimes. And we need to move quickly before they can destroy evidence or move assets. As Edgar made his calls, I sat in his office, watching the afternoon light shift across the room. In just a few days, my entire understanding of my marriage had crumbled, replaced by the harsh reality of Nicholas's true character. The man I had loved, had built a life with, had shared my most vulnerable moments with, had been plotting against me, not for days or weeks, but for months, possibly years. And yet, rather than feeling destroyed by this revelation, I felt strangely empowered. The fog of doubt and self-recrimination that had clouded my thinking for so long had lifted. For the first time in years, I saw Nicholas clearly, not as the charming, successful man I'd married, but as someone willing to sacrifice anything, including me, for his own ambition. "Edgar," I said, interrupting his conversation, "I want to move forward with all of it. The divorce filing, the fraud investigation, everything. But I want to do it my way, on my timeline." He covered the phone receiver with his hand. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time Nicholas and Serena learned what happens when they underestimate me." The week leading up to our lake house trip passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Nicholas and I moved through our shared spaces, like actors in different plays, each following our own script while pretending to engage with the other. He was rarely home, citing late meetings and client emergencies that required his immediate attention. When he did appear, he was distracted but making visible efforts to seem attentive, asking about my day, commenting on my appearance, suggesting dinner plans we both knew would never materialize. I played my role perfectly, the unsuspecting wife, slightly concerned about our growing distance but still fundamentally trusting. I left design magazines open to lake house renovations, mentioned shopping for new outdoor furniture, even suggested inviting friends to join us later in the summer. Each comment was carefully calculated to reinforce Nicholas's belief that I remained oblivious to his plans. Behind this facade, I was working constantly. My days were filled with clandestine meetings with Edgar and his team of specialists, financial investigators, forensic accountants, and a former prosecutor who now specialized in securities fraud. Evenings when Nicholas was working late, meeting Serena according to Bobby's surveillance, were spent gathering and organizing evidence, preparing legal documents, and strengthening my position for what was to come. The emotional toll was heavier than I had anticipated. Each new discovery of Nicholas's duplicity reopened wounds I thought had begun to heal. Bank statements revealed accounts I'd never known about. Email exchanges exposed lies told directly to my face, and phone records documented hundreds of calls to Serena during times Nicholas had claimed to be unreachable due to client meetings. 3 days before our scheduled trip to the lake house, Edgar called me into his office for a final review of our strategy. "Everything is in place," he confirmed, sliding a thick folder across his desk. "The moment Nicholas makes any move regarding the property, we're ready to respond with immediate legal action. The financial investigators have compiled enough evidence to trigger a regulatory investigation into both Nicholas and Serena's activities at Westbrook Capital." "And the lake house itself?" I asked. The property still my primary concern despite everything else that had been uncovered. "Secured," Edgar assured me. "I've filed additional protective measures with the county clerk. No transfer of ownership can occur without multiple verification steps, regardless of what Nicholas might try to make you sign." I nodded, feeling a momentary relief that was quickly replaced by a deeper anxiety. "What about personally? Am I ready for this?" Edgar's expression softened. "That's not a legal question, Sylvie. You've shown remarkable strength throughout this process. But confronting Nicholas directly will be difficult. Are you sure you want to go through with it this way? We could serve him the papers at his office, have the whole thing handled through attorneys." "No," I said firmly. "I need to see his face when he realizes his plan has failed. I need that moment for myself. Then we'll proceed as planned. Mrs. Winters has the spare key and will let the security team access the property tomorrow to install the cameras. They'll be completely hidden, but will record everything that happens during your confrontation. I left Edgar's office feeling both empowered and terrified. The mechanisms were in motion, the trap was set, but I still had to walk into it willingly, facing Nicholas's manipulation with my eyes open. That evening, as I packed for our weekend trip, Nicholas came home earlier than usual. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me fold sweaters and place them carefully in my weekend bag. "Don't forget something nice for dinner," he suggested, his tone casual. "I made reservations at Lakeside Inn for Saturday night. Thought we could make it special." I looked up, offering a smile that felt foreign on my face. "That sounds lovely. I'll pack the blue dress you like." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, closer than he'd been in weeks. "I know things have been strained between us lately. My fault. Work has been consuming everything. But this weekend is about us. About reconnecting." The sincerity in his voice was perfect. If I hadn't heard the recordings, seen the documents, known the truth, I might have believed him. That was the most chilling realization. How completely I would have accepted his lies. How eagerly I would have embraced this fictional reconciliation. "I've missed you," I said, the words bitter on my tongue despite my outwardly warm expression. "It will be good to have your full attention for once." Nicholas reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture of intimacy that once would have made my heart race. Now it took everything in me not to flinch away. "We have important things to discuss," he said, his eyes searching mine for any sign of suspicion. "About our future." "I look forward to it," I replied, holding his gaze steadily. Something in my response must have satisfied him, because he nodded, slightly before standing. "I have one more call to make, then I'm all yours for the evening. Dinner in an hour?" "Perfect." As he left the room, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled as I continued packing, the reality of what lay ahead washing over me in waves of dread and determination. That night, we ate takeout from our favorite Italian restaurant, drank wine Nicholas had brought home, a vintage much, more expensive than our usual, and maintained the elaborate fiction of a couple looking forward to a romantic weekend. I laughed at his jokes, responded to his touch, and pretended not to notice how frequently he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, as we cleared the dishes together in a domestic scene that felt surreal in its normalcy, Nicholas brought up the lake house directly for the first time. "I've been thinking," he said, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "Maybe it's time we considered other options for the lake property." I kept my expression neutral, focusing on wiping down the counter. "What kind of options?" "Real estate in that area has skyrocketed. We're sitting on an incredibly valuable asset that's only used a few weeks each year." "It's not just an asset, Nicholas," I replied, careful to keep my tone curious rather than defensive. "It's my family's home, my heritage." He moved behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders in what was meant to be a comforting gesture. "I understand the sentimental value, but sometimes we need to make practical decisions for our future." "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, turning to face him. "Nothing concrete yet," he backpedaled smoothly. "Just that we should discuss possibilities while we're there, see it with fresh eyes." I nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "You're right. We should definitely discuss it. This weekend." "Exactly," he said, visibly relieved by my apparent receptiveness. "We'll talk through everything." That night, as Nicholas slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing what was to come. The pain of betrayal had hardened into something else, a steely resolve that would carry me through the coming confrontation. Nicholas had underestimated me for the last time. In less than 48 hours, he would understand exactly who he had been dealing with all along. We left for the lake house early Friday morning, the Mercedes packed with our weekend bags and the groceries Nicholas had insisted on purchasing. Himself. Imported cheeses, expensive wines, gourmet ingredients for meals he never normally cooked. The performance was flawless, down to the playlist of songs from our early dating years streaming through the car's speakers as we drove out of the city. "Remember when we used to make this drive in your old Volvo?" Nicholas asked, his tone nostalgic, as we merged onto the highway. "That thing barely made it up the hills." "It got us there," I replied, allowing myself to be drawn into the reminiscence. "And it had character." "Character is one word for it," he laughed. "I think death trap might be more accurate." The conversation flowed with surprising ease as we covered the familiar route north toward Lake Windermere. Nicholas was charming, attentive, and seemingly relaxed, all the qualities that had made me fall in love with him years ago. If I didn't know better, I might have believed this was a genuine attempt to reconnect, to salvage what remained of our marriage. But I did know better. Every anecdote he shared, every tender glance, every casual touch on my arm was calculated. This was Nicholas preparing the ground, softening me up for whatever he planned to spring on me at the lake house. I played along, matching his warmth while maintaining a careful emotional distance that I disguised as lingering work stress. "Sorry," I said, after checking my phone for the third time in an hour. "The Anderson project is in its final phase, and the client keeps requesting last-minute changes." Nicholas waved it off magnanimously. "No apologies necessary. I understand better than anyone how clients can be. But maybe try to unplug this weekend? For both our sakes." "You're right," I agreed, slipping my phone back into my bag after sending a quick coded text to Edgar, confirming we were on schedule. This weekend is about us. As we turned onto the familiar winding road that led to the lake, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. The property came into view gradually. First the stand of ancient oak trees that marked the boundary line, then the glimmer of water beyond, and finally the house itself, its weathered cedar shingles and river stone chimney as beautiful and timeless as ever. Nicholas pulled into the gravel driveway and cut the engine. For a moment, we both sat in silence, taking in the view. "It really is spectacular," he said finally. "Your grandmother had incredible taste." "She did," I agreed, my throat tightening at the mention of my grandmother. What would she think of? What Nicholas had planned for her beloved home? What would she think of my response? We carried our bags inside, the familiar scent of pine and lake air washing over me as I stepped through the door. Everything looked exactly as it always had. The worn but immaculate Persian rugs, the shelves of leather-bound books, the comfortable furniture arranged to maximize the view of the lake. Only I knew about the invisible additions. The discreet cameras Edgar's security team had installed, recording every moment, every conversation that would unfold here. "I'll get the groceries," Nicholas offered. "Why don't you open a bottle of wine? We can have a glass on the dock before unpacking." "Perfect," I agreed, heading toward the kitchen while he returned to the car. As I selected a bottle from the wine rack and retrieved glasses from the cabinet, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to center myself for what was coming. This house had always been my safe place, my sanctuary. Now it was about to become the setting for the most difficult confrontation of my life. Nicholas returned with the grocery bags, efficiently unpacking them while I uncorked the wine. We moved around each other with the practiced ease of a long-married couple, a choreography perfected over years of shared domestic life. The familiarity of it sent a pang of genuine grief through me, not for what I was about to lose, but for what I had already lost long before I discovered Nicholas's betrayal. "Shall we?" he asked, taking the glasses I had poured. We walked down to the dock together, settling into the weathered Adirondack chairs that had been there since my childhood. The lake stretched before us, its surface rippling with the gentle afternoon breeze. In the distance, a boat moved slowly along the opposite shore, leaving a trail of white wake behind it. "Remember when we took your father's rowboat out that first summer?" Nicholas asked, handing me a glass. "And I tried to impress you by catching fish for dinner? And caught exactly nothing," I finished, smiling despite myself at the memory. We ended up eating peanut butter sandwiches instead. Not my finest moment, he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. But you married me anyway. I looked at him, over the rim of my wine glass, studying the face I had once known better than my own. When had he changed? Or had he always been this person, and I simply hadn't wanted to see it? Why did you marry me, Nicholas? I asked, the question emerging unbidden. He looked startled, then thoughtful. Because I loved you. Because you were different from any woman I'd ever met. You were talented, kind, genuine. You saw the world in a way that fascinated me. And now? I pressed, unable to stop myself. A shadow crossed his face. What do you mean? Do you still see me that way? Or has something changed? Nicholas set his glass down carefully on the arm of his chair. Sylvie, where is this coming from? I'm just wondering if we still know each other, I said, keeping my tone conversational, though my heart was pounding. People change over time. Their priorities shift. I wonder sometimes if we've grown in different directions without realizing it. He reached across the space between our chairs, taking my hand in his. That's why we're here. To reconnect. To make sure we're still growing together. The lie was so beautifully delivered, so perfectly calibrated to reassure me, that for a fleeting moment I almost wished it were true. Almost. I'd like that, I said softly, withdrawing my hand under the pretense of reaching for my wine. We sat, in silence for a while, watching the changing patterns of light on the water as the afternoon began its slow transition toward evening. The tension between us was palpable, Nicholas clearly wondering if I suspected anything, me wondering when and how he planned to make his move. Finally, he stood. I should start dinner. I promised you my famous grilled salmon, didn't I? You? Did, I acknowledged. I'll be up in a few minutes. I just want to sit here a little longer. As Nicholas walked back toward the house, I pulled out my phone and sent another text to Edgar. All proceeding as expected. No confrontation yet. His response came almost immediately. Security feed operational. Team on standby. I took a deep breath, gathering strength from the familiar view, from the memory of my grandmother sitting in this very spot, telling me stories about standing up for yourself, about knowing your own worth, about never letting anyone take what was rightfully yours. Then I rose and walked back to the house, ready for whatever came next. Dinner was a masterful performance on Nicholas's part. He grilled salmon to perfection, paired it with a crisp white wine, and maintained conversation that was both nostalgic and forward-looking. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed we were simply a couple working through a rough patch, rediscovering what had brought us together in the first place. I've been thinking, he said as we lingered over dessert. Fresh berries with cream that he'd whipped himself. Maybe we should spend more time here. I could work remotely a few days each week. We could make it a regular part of our lives again, not just an occasional getaway. That would be lovely, I replied, wondering how he could suggest this with a straight face while simultaneously planning to demolish the house. But what about your job? You've always said FaceTime at the office is crucial. Priorities change, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I've been reconsidering what's really important. Success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. The sentiment was so perfectly crafted, so exquisitely hypocritical that I nearly laughed. Instead, I squeezed his hand gently. I'd like that. This place has always been special to me. I know, he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. It's part of your heritage, your family history. There it was, the first subtle move in his gambit. Acknowledging the property's emotional significance to me, validating my attachment to it before he would attempt to persuade me to give it up. It is, I agreed. My grandmother always said this land had a soul. That's why she was so specific about keeping it in the family. A flicker of something, annoyance, impatience, crossed Nicholas's face before his expression smoothed back into attentive interest. She was a remarkable woman, very particular about her wishes. She knew what she wanted, I said, and she wasn't afraid to protect it. Nicholas withdrew his hand, reaching for his wine glass. She certainly did. Speaking of the property, though, I've been wondering if we're making the best use of it. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, curious rather than defensive. Property values in this area have increased dramatically in the last few years, he said, slipping into the confident, professional tone he used when explaining financial matters. This much lakefront acreage represents a significant asset that's currently underutilized. I hadn't thought of my family home as an asset to be utilized, I replied, allowing a hint of resistance to show. Nicholas backpedaled smoothly. Of course not, and that's not really what I meant. It's just that there might be ways to honor your grandmother's legacy while also securing our financial future. What did you have in mind? I asked, as if genuinely curious about his thoughts. He set down his wine glass, leaning forward slightly. There's been some interest from developers who specialize in luxury properties. They're looking for unique locations like this one. Developers? I frowned, as if this were the first I'd heard of such a possibility. You mean selling the property? Not necessarily selling outright, he clarified. There are partnership structures that would allow us to maintain an interest in the development while unlocking the property's value. Development, I repeated, the word flat. You're talking about tearing down my grandmother's house, Nicholas sighed, reaching for my hand again. Sylvie, I know this is difficult to consider, but we need to think about our future. This property represents a significant portion of our net worth, and it's essentially sitting idle most of the year. Our net worth? I questioned, withdrawing my hand. Nicholas, this property isn't part of our marital assets. It was left specifically to me. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. We're married, Sylvie. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. That's how it works. Actually, I said carefully, that's not always how it works, especially with inherited property that's specifically excluded from marital assets. Nicholas studied me for a moment, reassessing. I could almost see him recalibrating his approach, adjusting his strategy based on my unexpected pushback. This isn't about legal technicalities, he said, his voice softening. This is about what makes sense for us as a couple, for our shared future. And what future do you envision exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about how he would frame his plan. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I see us leveraging this property to create something remarkable, a development that honors the natural beauty of the site while providing luxury accommodations for people who appreciate what this area has to offer. Like a hotel? I pressed, wanting to see how much he would reveal. More like exclusive residential units, he clarified. Limited in number, architecturally significant, environmentally sensitive. The kind of project that would make headlines in design magazines. He was appealing to my professional interests, trying to make me see the development as a creative opportunity rather than the destruction of my heritage. It was clever. If I didn't know the truth, I might have been intrigued by the prospect. And you've already explored this possibility, I said, making it a statement rather than a question. Nicholas hesitated, then nodded. I've had some preliminary conversations. Nothing binding, just exploring options. With whom? I pushed further, wanting to see if he would mention Lockwood or Serena. A development group that specializes in luxury lakefront properties, he replied vaguely. They have an impressive portfolio. I see, I said, my tone neutral. And when were you planning to include me in these preliminary conversations about my family's property? Nicholas spread his hands in a placating gesture. That's exactly what I'm doing now, Sylvie. I wanted to understand the possibilities before bringing half-formed ideas to you. I know how much this place means to you. Yet you discussed demolishing it without consulting me, I countered, letting a hint of my true feelings show through. Not demolishing, he corrected quickly. Reimagining. And I was always going to discuss it with you before any decisions were made. I stood, gathering our dessert plates. It's getting late, and this is clearly a bigger conversation than I expected to have tonight. Why don't we clean up and continue this tomorrow when we're both fresh? Nicholas looked relieved at the apparent reprieve. Of course, you're right. It's a lot to process. We have all weekend to talk through it. As we cleared the table and loaded the dishwasher, I maintained a thoughtful but not hostile demeanor. Nicholas clearly believed he had planted the seed, that with proper nurturing over the weekend, he could bring me around to his way of thinking. What he didn't realize was that I was playing a different game entirely. Later, as we prepared for bed in the master suite overlooking the lake, Nicholas was attentive in ways he hadn't been for months, asking about a design project I'd mentioned weeks ago, commenting on the new earrings I was wearing, suggesting we take the boat out tomorrow, if the weather held. Each gesture was calculated to create the impression of a husband invested in our marriage, in our shared future. As we slid under the covers, Nicholas reached for me, his intention clear. For a moment, I froze, uncertain whether I could go through with this level of pretense. But I reminded myself of everything at stake, of what tomorrow would bring, and I allowed him to pull me closer. His kiss was familiar, yet strange. The same lips that had lied to me countless times now pressed against, mine with feigned passion. I closed my eyes and responded mechanically, performing the role of a wife reconnecting with her husband while my mind remained detached, focused on the confrontation to come. I woke before dawn, the pale light barely filtering through the curtains of the master bedroom. Nicholas slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, his arm possessively draped across my waist. Carefully, I extricated myself from his embrace and slipped out of bed, gathering my robe and moving silently into the hallway. The house was quiet, suspended in that liminal space between night and morning. I made my way to the kitchen, started the coffee machine, and then stepped out onto the back deck. The lake stretched before me, its surface perfectly still, mirroring the fading stars and the gradual lightening of the sky. This view had been my constant through every phase of life: childhood summers, teenage confidences shared with friends, my wedding day, and now, the unraveling of that same marriage. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, centering myself for what was to come. Today was the day. According to Bobby's intelligence, Nicholas had arranged for Serena to arrive at the nearby Lakeside Inn around noon. Martin Lockwood would join them at 2 p.m. with the paperwork for both the divorce and the property transfer. Nicholas planned to present me with a choice that was really no choice at all: sign over the lake house as part of our divorce settlement, or face a protracted legal battle that would drain my resources and resolve in his favor anyway. What Nicholas didn't know was that I had spent the past 3 weeks meticulously dismantling his plan piece by piece. While he believed I was oblivious, I had been gathering evidence, securing legal protections, and positioning myself to not only counter his attack, but to launch one of my own. My phone vibrated in my robe pocket, a text from Edgar confirming that everything was in place. His team would be stationed nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. The cameras hidden throughout the house were recording, documenting everything that occurred. Most importantly, the county clerk had filed the additional protection orders on the property, making any transfer Nicholas attempted legally void. I sent a quick confirmation, then deleted the message thread. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I heard movement in the kitchen behind me. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, wearing the pajama pants and t-shirt he'd packed for the weekend. "You're up early," he observed, his voice still rough with sleep. "Couldn't wait for coffee?" I turned to face him, offering a small smile. The sunrise over the lake is worth waking up for. I've always thought so. He stepped onto the deck, coming to stand beside me at the railing. It is beautiful, he agreed, his eyes on the horizon where pink and gold were beginning to seep into the pale blue. I forget sometimes, living in the city, how quiet it can be out here. For a moment, we stood in silence, watching the day begin. I wondered if any part of him felt remorse for what he was planning, if somewhere beneath the ambition and calculation there remained anything of the man I had once loved. I was thinking about what you said last night, I ventured, still gazing, out at the lake. About the property. Nicholas turned slightly toward me, his interest piqued but trying not to appear too eager. Oh? I understand your perspective, I said carefully. From a purely financial standpoint, you're probably right. The land is valuable, and this house, beautiful as it is, represents only one way to utilize it. Hope flickered across his features, quickly masked by sympathetic understanding. I know it's not an easy thing to consider. Your family history here runs deep. It does, I agreed. Which is why I'd need to understand exactly what any development would entail before I could even begin to consider it. Of course, he said quickly. Complete transparency, I wouldn't expect anything less. Do you have any specific plans, proposals I could review? I asked, as if genuinely curious. Nicholas hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal at this stage. I have some preliminary concepts, nothing finalized. I'd love to see them, I said. Maybe after breakfast? Absolutely, he agreed, visibly, pleased with this unexpected opening. I'll pull everything together. We moved back into the kitchen, falling into the familiar weekend routine, Nicholas making breakfast while I prepared coffee. The domesticity of it was surreal given what I knew was coming, but I maintained the pretense, discussing trivial matters like the weather forecast and whether we should take the boat out later. After breakfast, Nicholas disappeared into the guest room where he'd stored his briefcase, returning with a slim portfolio. He laid it on the dining table, opening it to reveal architectural renderings of Windermere Villas, the very same designs I had already seen in the documents Tiffany's brother had provided. These are just conceptual at this stage, Nicholas explained, his voice taking on the confident tone he used in business presentations. The idea is to create a limited number of luxury units that maximize the natural beauty of the site while providing exclusivity and privacy. I examined the renderings, noting how the development would completely transform the property, leaving nothing of my grandmother's home or the landscape she had so carefully preserved. And this would involve demolishing the existing house? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Unfortunately, yes, Nicholas admitted. The current structure doesn't align with the overall concept, but we could incorporate elements, perhaps some of the stonework or distinctive fixtures, as a nod to its history. I see, I said, turning to the next page, a financial prospectus outlining projected returns. And this is the investment structure? A simplified version, he confirmed. The actual vehicle is more complex, but the basic premise is that we would contribute the land in exchange for a significant equity stake in the development. We'd benefit from both the initial sale of units and ongoing management fees. We? I questioned. Nicholas smiled reassuringly. As a couple, of course. This would be our joint venture. I continued paging through the proposal, asking questions that suggested serious consideration about timelines, environmental impact, architectural details. Nicholas answered each query with practiced expertise, clearly relieved that I was engaging with the concept rather than rejecting it outright. This is certainly thorough, I said finally, closing the portfolio. You've obviously put a lot of thought into it. I have, he agreed. I believe it represents the best path forward for us. A way to honor the property's significance while securing our financial future. I nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate you sharing this with me. It's given me a lot to consider. Take all the time you need, Nicholas said, though I could sense his impatience beneath the supportive veneer. This is a big decision. I want you to be comfortable with it. Actually, I said, rising from the table, I think I'd like to walk. Down to the lake. Clear my head a bit. Would you mind? Of course not, he replied magnanimously. I have a few work emails to catch up on anyway. Take your time. As I slipped out the back door and made my way down the path to the shore, I checked my phone again. A text from Bobby confirmed that Serena had checked into the Lakeside Inn as expected. Everything was proceeding according to plan, both Nicholas's and mine. I walked along the shoreline, the gentle lapping of water against the rocky beach, providing a soothing counterpoint to the tension building inside me. In a few hours, Nicholas would make his move, revealing the true purpose of this weekend getaway, and I would be ready. Returning to the house, I found Nicholas on his phone in the living room, speaking in the low, intimate tone he reserved for Serena. He quickly ended the call when he saw me enter. Work? I asked innocently. Client issue. He lied smoothly. Nothing that can't wait until Monday. I smiled, removing my light jacket. I think I might take a shower before lunch. That walk cleared my head. Good idea, Nicholas replied. I thought we might drive into town for lunch. There's a new bistro that's supposed to be excellent. A convenient excuse to bring us near the Lakeside Inn where Serena was waiting. I wondered if he planned to have her accidentally run into us, or if that confrontation was scheduled for later. Sounds perfect, I agreed. As I headed upstairs to shower, I sent one final text to Edgar. Proceeding as planned. Town for lunch, then back here for the confrontation. Be ready. His reply was immediate and reassuring. All in place. You're not alone in this. The drive into town was tense despite our casual conversation. Nicholas kept checking his watch, his practiced nonchalance betrayed by the slight furrow between his eyebrows and the too firm grip of his hands on the steering wheel. I maintained my role, responsive but distracted, as if still processing the development proposal he'd shown me. The bistro turned out to be directly across the street from the Lakeside Inn, its outdoor patio offering a clear view of the hotel's entrance. As we were seated, I noted Nicholas's careful positioning, his back to the wall, facing the street, ensuring he wouldn't miss Serena's arrival. The salmon is supposed to be excellent here, he commented, scanning the menu while his eyes periodically flicked toward the hotel entrance. I think I'll try the trout, I replied, following his gaze as if curious about what had captured his attention. Are you expecting to see someone? Nicholas's smile was immediate but strained. Just admiring the view. This town has really developed since we first started coming here. It has, I agreed, though I sometimes miss how quiet it used to be. Our lunch progressed with similar surface-level pleasantries while undercurrents of tension flowed beneath. Nicholas ordered a glass of wine but barely touched it, checking his phone with increasing frequency as the meal wore on. I knew he was waiting for confirmation from Serena, perhaps growing concerned that she hadn't appeared as planned. Everything okay? I asked after his third glance at his phone in as many minutes. Fine, he replied, tucking the device away. Just a work thing. I nodded, pretending to accept this explanation while inwardly knowing that Serena was deliberately staying out of sight. Bobby had arranged for a hotel staff member to deliver a message to her room, a supposed update from Nicholas. Changing their original plan, she would now wait for his signal before making any appearance. As we finished our meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the privacy of the stall, I quickly checked my own messages. Edgar confirmed that the legal team was in position, near the lake house. Bobby reported that Lockwood had arrived at the hotel and was meeting with Serena in her room, reviewing documents. Everything was proceeding exactly as anticipated. When I returned to the table, Nicholas had already paid, the bill and was visibly anxious to leave. "Ready to head back?" he asked, standing as I approached. "I thought we might take the boat out before dinner." "That sounds lovely," I agreed, noting the tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. During the drive back to the lake house, Nicholas grew increasingly quiet, his earlier charm giving way to distraction. I knew what was happening. He was preparing himself for what would come next, mentally rehearsing how he would transition from doting husband to ruthless adversary. As we pulled into the driveway, my phone vibrated with a text. I checked it casually, careful to keep my expression neutral. It was from Bobby. "S&L leaving hotel now. ETA your location 30 Minar." "Everything okay?" Nicholas asked, watching me carefully. "Just Tiffany," I lied, slipping the phone into my pocket, checking how our weekend is going. Inside the house, Nicholas suggested we change into more casual clothes for boating. I agreed, heading upstairs to the master bedroom while he went to the guest room where he'd stored his luggage. This separate arrangement had been his idea. A thoughtful gesture to give me space, he'd claimed, though I now understood it was simply to keep his documents and communications with Serena private. In the bedroom, I changed quickly into jeans and a light sweater, appropriate for an afternoon on the lake, but also suitable for the confrontation to come. I checked my appearance in the mirror, surprised by the calm determination I saw reflected there. The woman looking back at me was not the conflict-averse, trusting wife Nicholas believed he could manipulate. She was someone stronger, someone prepared to fight for what was hers. I took a moment to center myself, remembering my grandmother's words. True strength isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about how you get back up. Then I descended the stairs to find Nicholas waiting in the living room, changed into casual clothes but still with an undercurrent of tension visible in his posture. "Ready for that boat ride?" he asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Actually," I said, glancing at my watch, "I think I might make us some tea first. It's a bit chillier than I expected." Nicholas nodded, though I could see the impatience flickering behind his composed expression. "Good idea. I'll help." In the kitchen, we moved around each other with practiced ease, Nicholas filling the kettle while I retrieved mugs and tea bags. The domesticity of the moment was jarring in contrast to what I knew was about to unfold. "Sylvie," Nicholas began as the kettle heated, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, about the development proposal." "Oh?" I kept my voice casual, preparing myself. "I believe there's an opportunity here that we shouldn't overlook," he continued, leaning against the counter. "The financial implications for our future are significant." "It would certainly be a change," I acknowledged, selecting a tea bag with deliberate care. "Though I'm still not entirely comfortable with the idea of demolishing my grandmother's house." Nicholas's expression softened into something that might have appeared genuine to someone who didn't know what I now knew. "I understand that. Family legacy is important. But sometimes we need to make difficult decisions for the greater good." "The greater good?" I repeated, meeting his gaze directly. "Whose greater good exactly, Nicholas?" A flicker of surprise crossed his features before he recovered. "Ours, of course. Our financial security, our future." The kettle clicked off, steam rising from its spout, but neither of us moved to pour the water. We stood facing each other across the kitchen island, the pretense beginning to crack. "And this development," I pressed further, "you've already invested considerable time in planning it, haven't you? More than just the preliminary conversations you mentioned." Nicholas's eyes narrowed slightly. "I've explored possibilities. Yes, that's what I do professionally. Identify opportunities and develop strategies to maximize them." "Opportunities," I echoed. "Is that what my family's home is to you? An opportunity to be maximized?" "You're oversimplifying," he countered, his voice hardening slightly. "This isn't just about the house. It's about leveraging an underutilized asset to secure our financial future. Our financial future, I repeated, emphasizing the word. Yet the property isn't in both our names, is it? It's solely in mine. The tension in the room shifted palpably. Nicholas straightened, abandoning the relaxed posture he'd been maintaining. That's a technicality, Sylvie. We're married. What's yours is mine. Is that what you told the developers at Lakeside Partners? I asked, watching his expression carefully. That despite the legal ownership, you could deliver the property? Nicholas went very still, his eyes locking with mine. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Just like I think you know exactly where Serena Wright is right now. The mention of Serena's name hit him like a physical blow. His face drained of color, then flushed with anger. What are you? The sound of tires on gravel interrupted him. A car pulling into our driveway. Nicholas's head snapped toward the window, confusion and alarm replacing his anger. Are you expecting someone? He demanded. In a manner of speaking, I replied calmly, though I believe they're actually here to see you. As the implications of my words sank in, Nicholas's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. The pretense was gone now, the mask of loving husband discarded as no longer useful. How long have you known? He asked, his voice low. And dangerous. Long enough, I answered, meeting his gaze without flinching. Long enough to understand exactly what you and Serena have been planning. Long enough to do something about it. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the house. Nicholas moved toward the window, his face hardening as he saw Serena and Martin Lockwood standing in our driveway. His confusion was evident. This wasn't how their carefully orchestrated plan was supposed to unfold. What have you done? He demanded, turning back to me, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. I haven't done anything, Nicholas, I replied calmly. I simply invited the relevant parties to join our discussion about the future of my property. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension in the room. Nicholas stood, frozen, clearly calculating his options, trying to determine how to salvage his plan. Aren't you going to answer that? I asked, gesturing toward the door. Your business partners are waiting. His eyes narrowed. This isn't a game, Sylvie. No, I agreed, my voice hardening. It never was. I moved toward the door, Nicholas following close behind. When I opened it, Serena stood on the threshold, her confident expression faltering as she took in the scene. Me, calm and collected, Nicholas visibly unsettled behind me. Sylvie, she said, recovering quickly and extending her hand as if this were a normal social call. I'm not sure if you remember me. I work with Nicholas at Westbrook Capital. Serena Wright, I acknowledged without taking her hand. Associate Director of Special Projects. And behind you must be Martin Lockwood, CEO of Lakeside Development Partners. Lockwood, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the tan of someone who spent considerable time on golf courses, looked uncomfortable. This clearly wasn't the scenario he had been promised. Ms. Harrington? He nodded. I believe there's been some confusion about today's meeting. No confusion at all, I replied, stepping back from the doorway. Please, come in. We were just discussing the development plans for my property. Nicholas moved forward, placing a hand on Serena's arm as if to stop her entering. This isn't the right time, he said in a low voice. There's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding. I interjected, is your belief that I would sign over my family's property without knowing the full truth? Please, everyone, let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss. The gravity in my voice left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Nicholas stepped aside, allowing Serena and Lockwood to enter the living room. The four of us settled in an awkward tableau, Serena and Nicholas on the sofa, Lockwood in an armchair, me standing by the fireplace where my grandmother's portrait hung, her steady gaze seeming to watch over the proceedings. Sylvie, Nicholas began, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used in difficult negotiations. "I can explain." "Allow me," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You've been having an affair with Serena for approximately 18 months. During that time, you've been plotting to divorce me and develop my family's property into luxury condominiums. You plan to pressure me into signing over the lake house as part of our divorce settlement, using your understanding of my conflict-averse nature to manipulate me into accepting an inequitable arrangement." The color drained from Nicholas's face as I continued. "Simultaneously, you and Serena have created an investment vehicle for the development project that includes, in Ms. Wright's words, creative accounting, to generate additional margins for early investors like Mr. Lockwood here. Creative accounting that, when examined by financial regulators, would likely constitute fraud." Lockwood shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting between Nicholas and Serena. "I was assured this property acquisition was above board, that the divorce was already in process, and the property settlement agreed upon in principle." "Quite the contrary," I replied. "There was no divorce filing, no property settlement, and no disclosure to me about any development plans until Nicholas attempted to manipulate me this weekend." "Nicholas?" Serena's voice was sharp, her composure cracking. "You said this was handled. You said she was willing to settle." "She is," Nicholas insisted, his confident mask slipping as he struggled to regain control of the situation. "Sylvie is reasonable. She understands the financial realities." "Do I asked, moving to the coffee table where I placed a thick folder I'd retrieved from my bag. "Let's discuss financial realities then." I opened the folder, revealing copies of the documents I had gathered over the past weeks. Bank statements, showing accounts Nicholas had hidden from me, emails between him and Serena discussing their plans, preliminary contracts with Lakeside Development, and investment prospectuses with the creative accounting Serena had mentioned to Lockwood. "How did you get these?" Nicholas demanded, his face flushing with anger. "That's not important," I replied calmly. "What's important is that I have them, along with recordings of your conversations with Serena and Mr. Lockwood discussing the fraudulent aspects of your investment structure." "Recordings?" Lockwood stood abruptly, his professional demeanor shattering. "What recordings?" I gestured vaguely around the room. "This house has excellent acoustics, and as the sole legal owner, I'm within my rights to record conversations on my property." This wasn't entirely accurate. The recordings had come from Bobby's surveillance and the cameras Edgar had installed, but the effect on Lockwood was immediate and dramatic. He turned to Nicholas, his expression thunderous. "You assured me this was a clean deal," he accused. "No complications, no legal entanglements." "It is clean," Nicholas insisted, standing to face Lockwood. "Sylvie is bluffing. She doesn't have recordings. She's trying to increase her settlement leverage." "Am I?" I asked, pulling out my phone. With a tap, I played a clip from the conversation Bobby had captured between Serena and Lockwood at the Lake House, the damning exchange about efficiencies in the cost structure and returns not reflected in the official prospectus. The room fell silent as the recording played. Serena's face paled, while Lockwood looked increasingly alarmed. Nicholas stood rigid, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. When the clip ended, I put my phone away. I have much more, as do the relevant regulatory authorities, who received copies of all this documentation yesterday. They were particularly interested in the use of client funds from Westbrook Capital to finance preliminary development work without proper disclosure. "You're bluffing," Nicholas said again, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's not bluffing," came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Edgar standing there, flanked by two individuals in suits who I recognized as the financial investigators he had engaged. "The Securities and Exchange Commission received our formal complaint yesterday. They're quite interested in speaking with all of you." Nicholas's face contorted with rage. "You had no right," he snarled at me. "This was our future, our opportunity." "No, Nicholas," I corrected him. my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "This was your attempt to steal my property and my dignity. And it's over." Lockwood was already moving toward the door, his self-preservation instincts clearly kicking in. "I knew nothing about any financial irregularities," he announced to no one in particular. "I was misled about the ownership situation. My company will cooperate fully with any investigation." Serena remained seated, her composed exterior finally cracking to reveal the panic beneath. "Nicholas," she said urgently, "we need to talk to legal. Now." But Nicholas wasn't listening. He was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been grudging respect. "You were never supposed to find out," he said quietly. "You were never supposed to fight back." "That was your mistake," I replied. "You never really knew me at all." The next few hours unfolded like scenes from a movie I was watching rather than living. Edgar efficiently managed the situation, directing his team to document everything while the financial investigators spoke separately with Lockwood, who seemed eager to distance himself from Nicholas and Serena's schemes. The couple themselves sat in stony silence at opposite ends of the sofa, occasionally conferring in hushed, urgent whispers that grew increasingly heated as the reality of their situation sank in. I moved through it all with a strange sense of detachment, answering questions when asked, signing documents Edgar presented, but mostly observing the dismantling of the life I had known. Nicholas barely looked at me, his attention focused on his phone as he presumably contacted legal representation. Serena alternated between quiet panic and bursts of defensive anger, once even suggesting that she too had been manipulated by Nicholas, a claim that fell flat when confronted with the evidence of her active participation. By late afternoon, Lockwood had left with Edgar's team to provide a formal statement, eager to salvage what he could of his reputation and business by cooperating. The financial investigators had gathered enough preliminary evidence to justify freezing several accounts associated with the development scheme, effectively halting any further movement of funds until a complete audit could be performed. As the EIT house emptied of officials, an uncomfortable silence settled over the three of us who remained, me, Nicholas, and Serena. The theatrical confrontation was over, leaving only the painful reality of 3 lives forever altered by betrayal and deceit. "What happens now?" Serena finally asked, her voice small in the gathering dusk. She wasn't looking at me, but at Nicholas, who sat with his head in his hands. "Now," I said, my voice steady despite my exhaustion, "you both leave my home." Nicholas looked up, his expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "You've destroyed everything," he said, not in anger, but with a flat certainty. "My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for." "No, Nicholas," I corrected him. "You did that yourself when you decided to build your success on lies and fraud. I simply refuse to be collateral damage in your schemes." Serena stood abruptly. "This is pointless. We need to go, Nicholas. We need to talk to the lawyers, figure out our next steps." Nicholas remained seated, his gaze fixed on me. "You think you've won," he said, "but this isn't over. There will still be a divorce, and I will still get what I'm legally entitled to from our marriage." "You're right about one thing," I agreed. "There will be a divorce. But as for what you're entitled to, I suggest you consult your attorney about the implications of financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty on divorce settlements. Edgar can provide the relevant case law if you're interested." Something in my calm certainty must have finally penetrated his armor of self-righteousness. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before he schooled his features back into impassive determination. Without another word, he rose and followed Serena to the door. At the threshold, he paused, turning back to me. For a moment, I thought. I saw a glimpse of the man I had married, a flash of genuine regret beneath the anger and calculation. "It didn't start out as a lie," he said quietly. "In the beginning, with us. That part was real." I considered his words, searching my own heart for what I believed. Maybe, I conceded. But it ended as a lie, and that's what matters now. After they left, the house settled into a silence that felt both empty and full, absent of the tension that had filled it for the past 24 hours, yet heavy with the echoes of what had transpired. I walked through each room, turning on lamps as evening deepened into night, reclaiming my space one light at a time. In the kitchen, I found the mugs we had set out for tea before the confrontation, the kettle long cold. I emptied it and refilled it, going through the motions of making a single cup of tea with a mechanical precision that kept my mind occupied, prevented it from spiraling into the overwhelming emotions waiting at the edges of my consciousness. With steaming mug in hand, I made my way to the dock, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs to watch the last light fade from the sky. The lake stretched before me, dark and still, reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. This view, this peace, was what my grandmother had wanted to preserve for me, what she had protected with her careful estate planning, her insistence that some things were too precious to risk. The sound of tires on gravel roused me from my contemplation. For a moment I tensed, wondering if Nicholas had returned, but the familiar figure of Edgar emerged from the car, making his way down the path to the dock. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Any updates?" Edgar settled into the chair with a sigh that spoke of a long and difficult day. "Lockwood is fully cooperating. He's primarily concerned with protecting himself and his company from the fallout. The SEC has enough to begin a formal investigation into both Nicholas and Serena's activities at Westbrook Capital. The firm itself is launching an internal audit." "And the lake house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Completely secure," he confirmed. "The additional filings we made ensure that no transaction involving the property can proceed without multiple verifications of your consent. Nicholas can't touch it, directly or indirectly." I nodded, sipping my tea as I absorbed this information. "What about the divorce?" "We can file first thing Monday morning," Edgar replied. "Given the circumstances and the evidence of financial misconduct, we're in a very strong position. Nicholas may bluster about fighting for his share of marital assets, but his legal team will advise him to settle quickly and quietly to avoid further damage to his reputation and potential criminal charges." "He won't follow that advice," I said, knowing Nicholas too well to believe he would choose the rational path. "His pride won't let him." Edgar shrugged. "Then we proceed to litigation, where all of this becomes public record. I don't think Westbrook Capital will appreciate having their internal operations scrutinized in open court. They'll pressure him to resolve this quietly." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the night deepen over the lake. The events of the day, of the past weeks, were beginning to catch up with me, exhaustion settling into my bones, like a physical weight. "You did well today, Sylvie," Edgar said finally. "Your grandmother would have been proud." The mention of my grandmother brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I hope so," I whispered. "I tried to protect what she entrusted to me." "You did more than that," Edgar said, his voice gentle. "You stood up for yourself. Blair always said that was the most important legacy she could leave you, not the property, but the strength to defend what matters." I smiled through my tears, remembering my grandmother's fierce independence, her unwavering sense of self-worth. She always did say the house was just wood and stone. It's what we build inside ourselves that really matters. Wise woman, Edgar. Agreed. As the night air grew chiller, we made our way back to the house. Edgar declined my offer to stay, citing his hotel reservation in town, but promised to return in the morning to help with any remaining details. Left alone again, I moved through the house, securing doors and windows with the familiar routine of closing up for the night. In the master bedroom, I gathered Nicholas's few remaining belongings, a book on the nightstand, toiletries in the bathroom, and placed them in a bag to be returned to him through Edgar. The simple act of removing these traces of his presence was strangely therapeutic, each item set aside representing another small step toward reclaiming my space, my life. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the vanity mirror, the same mirror where I had checked my appearance before descending the stairs to confront Nicholas earlier that day. The woman looking back at me now seemed different somehow. Tired, yes, but also stronger, more defined, as if the day's events had burned away something inessential to reveal a more authentic self beneath. "Hello?" I whispered to my reflection, a faint smile touching my lips. It felt like an introduction to myself, to the person I was becoming in the aftermath of betrayal and the recovery of my power. I slept deeply that night, dreamless and untroubled, in my grandmother's house, under my grandmother's roof, safe in the knowledge that I had honored her legacy in the way that mattered most, by finding the strength she had always believed I possessed. 6 months after that fateful weekend at the lake house, I stood on the dock watching autumn leaves dance across the water's surface. The trees surrounding the property had transformed into a riot of red and gold, their brilliant colors reflected in the lake like an impressionist painting come to life. This annual display had been my grandmother's favorite season at Windermere Lodge, and now I understood why. There was something profound in witnessing nature's transition, the way it embraced change while remaining fundamentally itself. My own transformation had been equally dramatic, though less visible to the casual observer. The divorce was finalized with surprising speed, Nicholas ultimately accepting a settlement far less favorable than what he would have received had he not attempted his scheme. His legal team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against him, had counseled pragmatism over pride. In the end, financial self-preservation won out over his desire to punish me for foiling his plans. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into Westbrook Capital was ongoing, but Nicholas and Serena had both been terminated immediately after the firm's internal audit confirmed their misconduct. Industry publications that had once celebrated Nicholas's financial acumen now featured his name in articles about ethical breaches and misuse of client funds. Serena had disappeared from public view entirely, reportedly moving to another state to rebuild her career away from the shadow of the scandal. Martin Lockwood had emerged relatively unscathed, his early cooperation with investigators allowing him to position himself as another victim of Nicholas's deception, rather than a willing participant. Lakeside Development had abandoned any interest in properties around Lake Windermere, their ambitious condominium project shelved indefinitely amid concerns about regulatory scrutiny. As for me, I had spent the summer and early fall dividing my time between the city and the lake house, gradually disentangling the threads of my life from Nicholas's. Our shared apartment had been sold, the proceeds divided according to the settlement agreement. I had purchased a smaller place in a neighborhood I had always loved, but Nicholas had deemed insufficient for someone of his professional stature. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now found myself in exactly the kind of home I would have chosen had I been following my own preferences all along. My design firm had thrived in the wake of my personal upheaval, perhaps because I approached my work with a new clarity and confidence. Clients responded to this shift, and we secured several high-profile projects that expanded our portfolio and reputation. Tiffany had been promoted to partner, her loyalty and friendship during my darkest moments cementing our professional relationship into something deeper and more enduring. "Penny for your thoughts," came a voice from behind me, breaking my reverie. I turned to see Bobby making his way down the dock, 2 mugs of steaming coffee in hand. In the months since the confrontation, our professional relationship had evolved into something more personal. Not romance, we both carried too much baggage for that kind of simplicity, but a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experience. "Just reflecting," I replied, accepting the offered mug gratefully. "It's been quite a year." Bobby settled into the chair beside mine, his gaze taking in the autumn panorama spread before us. That's one way of putting it. I would have gone with complete life upheaval personally, I laughed, the sound carrying across the water. That works too, though upheaval suggests something entirely negative, and I'm not sure that's accurate anymore. Bobby studied me over the rim of his mug. No regrets, then? About exposing Nicholas's scheme? Not one, I said firmly. About the years spent with him? That's more complicated. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a pair of loons dive beneath the surface of the lake, emerging some distance away with small fish gleaming in their beaks, life continuing, adapting, finding what it needed to survive and thrive. I got the final report from the financial investigators yesterday, Bobby said eventually. They've traced most of the money Nicholas had hidden. The courts should be able to recover the majority of the investments he solicited under false pretenses. That's good, I replied, though the details of Nicholas's financial crimes had become less important to me as time passed. What mattered was that he could no longer hurt me, could no longer threaten what I valued. The rest was just paperwork and legal consequences, necessary, but not central to my healing. Edgar called this morning, I added. He's finished updating my estate planning documents. Everything is properly structured now to protect the lake house long term. Bobby nodded approvingly. Smart move. Though I'm pretty sure if anyone tried to come after this place again, you'd handle them as effectively as you did Nicholas. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I said with a small smile. Once in a lifetime is enough for that kind of drama. As the afternoon light began to soften, we made our way back to the house. I had invited a small group of friends for the weekend, Tiffany and her husband, Edgar and his wife, and a few others who had supported me through the difficult months of divorce and rebuilding. The renovation work I'd begun in the spring was finally complete, breathing new life into my grandmother's beloved home while preserving its essential character. The kitchen island was spread with appetizers I'd prepared earlier, local cheeses, fresh bread, smoked trout from a nearby fishery. Bobby poured wine while I lit candles against the gathering dusk, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere that reflected my vision for this next chapter of life at the lake house. It looks wonderful, Sylvie, he commented, taking in the subtle changes I'd made to the space. New paint, updated lighting, artwork I'd collected over the years but had never been able to display in the sterile environment Nicholas had preferred. It feels like you now. That's exactly what I was aiming for, I replied, suddenly struck by the profound truth of his observation. For years, I had adjusted my taste, my preferences, even my personality to accommodate Nicholas's vision of what our life should be. Now, freed from those constraints, I was rediscovering what it meant to make choices based solely on my own desires and values. The sound of car tires on gravel announced the arrival of my first guests. As I moved to welcome them, I passed the portrait of my grandmother that still hung in the living room, now accompanied by photographs of various family members across generations. I paused briefly, meeting her painted gaze. Thank you, I whispered, touching the frame gently. Not just for the house itself, though that gift had proven even more valuable than I'd initially understood, but for the legacy of strength she had passed down, the example she had set of a woman who knew her own worth and refused to compromise it for anyone. In trying to protect her physical legacy, I had finally claimed my spiritual inheritance, the inner fortitude she had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. As I opened the front door to greet my friends, the autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, the essence of the place that had sheltered generations of my family. This house had witnessed marriages and births, celebrations and sorrows, betrayals and redemptions. It had survived attempts to destroy it, just as I had. And like me, it stood stronger for having weathered the storm. The winter came early to Lake Windermere that year, the first snow falling in mid-November, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland of white. I had decided to spend the holiday season at the lake house rather than in the city. My first Christmas since the divorce. The first in many years where I wouldn't be attending Nicholas's firm parties or hosting the carefully orchestrated dinners he had considered essential to his professional image. Instead, I invited those who had become my true family, Tiffany and her husband, Edgar and his wife, Bobby, and a few other close friends who had stood by me through everything. The house embraced us with its warmth, the old wooden beams and stone fireplace providing a cocoon against the winter chill. On Christmas Eve, as we gathered in the living room with the fire crackling and snow falling gently outside the windows, Edgar raised his glass in a toast. "To Sylvie," he said, his eyes twinkling with the same kindness that had guided me through the darkest days of the past year, "who reminds us all that it's never too late to reclaim your own story." The words resonated deeply as glasses clinked and smiles were exchanged. That was exactly what I had done. Reclaimed my story from those who had tried to rewrite it without my consent. Later that evening, after my guests had retired to their rooms, I sat alone by the fire, a leather-bound journal open on my lap. I had begun writing in it shortly after the confrontation with Nicholas, initially as a way to process my emotions, but increasingly as a chronicle of my journey toward rebuilding. The entries traced my evolution from shock and grief through anger and determination to a place of genuine peace. The most recent page held a letter I had written to my grandmother, telling her everything that had happened and how her foresight had protected not just the house, but, in many ways, me as well. Writing to her had become a ritual of sorts, a way to honor her continued presence in my life even in absence. "I understand now why this place meant so much to you," I wrote, the firelight dancing across the page. "It's not just about the land or the building itself. It's about having somewhere in the world that is truly yours, somewhere that reflects your values and choices rather than someone else's expectations. You tried to tell me that, in your way, but I needed to learn it for myself." Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake unique and perfect, accumulating into something greater than its individual parts, like the small choices and actions that had eventually allowed me to break free from Nicholas's control and reclaim my independence. As spring approached, I made another significant decision. The city apartment, while lovely, had begun to feel more like a way station than a home. My heart was increasingly at Lake Windermere, where I felt connected to something larger than myself, to family history, to nature, to a pace of life that allowed for genuine reflection and creativity. With Tiffany's encouragement, I restructured our design firm to allow me to work primarily from the lake house, coming into the city only for client meetings and presentations. Modern technology made this arrangement entirely feasible, and the change brought an unexpected benefit. My designs took on a new depth and authenticity, influenced by the natural beauty that surrounded me daily. Nicholas's attempt to force me out of my home had instead resulted in me embracing it more fully than ever before. On the anniversary of that fateful weekend confrontation, I walked alone along the lakeshore, watching the ice finally release its grip as spring asserted itself. The metaphor wasn't lost on me, how frozen things eventually thaw, how what seems permanent can transform when conditions change. I had learned that betrayal, painful as it is, can also be clarifying. It can strip away illusions and expose truths we've been avoiding. Nicholas had intended to take everything from me, but in the attempt, he had inadvertently given me back myself. Standing on the shore, watching new life emerge after the long winter, I understood that some endings are really beginnings in disguise. The story of my marriage was over, but my own story continued, richer and more authentic than before. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.